northern half of Saskatchewan sits the picturesque city of Saskatoon, which, along with the rest of the province, only elected Conservative MPs in 2019. This election, one riding, Saskatoon West, is considered one to watch.
And so I think you've got a situation here where the NDP has long had very strong provincial support in the area. They have lots of good old-time NDP folks who really know how to sort of work the numbers, work the phones, get people out to the polls. That's their real strength in the area. The Conservatives have probably a growing number of people who are like-minded who've been moving into the riding. And many of those are new Canadians. And for a long time we had this idea that new Canadians were sort of automatically liberal. And I think this election should disabuse us of this quite dramatically. We're seeing a fair number of new Canadians show up in the People's Party of Canada, more than you would expect as candidates and whatever else. I think we're going to see a lot of new Canadians who are very economically driven. Our immigration policy favors people who bring money into this province. So I think this is really a sort of a classic sort of mixed bag. It's going to come down to the question of who can get their voters out to the polls.
Saskatoon's population is roughly 250,000 people and growing quickly. In fact, the population grew by about 2% last year. 20% of the people who live here are Indigenous, and the majority of Indigenous residents do live on the west side in this riding. In addition to that, the city is attracting immigrants at an incredible rate. It makes for a rich tapestry, but also some unique issues.
And did you get the card from Elections Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll say, it says on there too.
It's a sunny Sunday and Sikh families gather at the Gurdwara. That's where we catch up with the Conservative incumbent for the riding. It's a new riding and has been a back and forth battle between the Conservatives and NDP for the past 2 terms. The riding formed after some boundary redistribution, with the first MP elected in 2015, New Democrat Sherry Benson. 4 years later, Conservative Brad Redekop turned the seat from orange to blue. This riding has flipped orange to blue. Is it now the blues to keep, or is it the oranges to take away?
Well, I'd like to think it's the blues to keep, and we are working extremely hard to keep this riding blue. We had about 18,000 supporters last time. So yeah, so we're trying to find more, always want more, always need more supporters. So once you get your citizenship, you can vote for me then?
Sure.
Okay, excellent.
Also at the Temple, Redekop's main political opponent, his only real competition as far as political watchers are concerned.
My name is Robert Doucette. I am the NDP candidate for Saskatoon West. Why am I running? Couple things. Just so that people know, I'm a 60 Scoop survivor. I'm a Métis person of Cree Dene ancestry, and I was put in a non-Indigenous foster home all my life until I left at 18.
This is a special constituency here. This is the west side of Saskatoon, and Saskatoon is sort of divided into 2 parts by the river, the more affluent east side and the working class west side. It's always been that way, right, from settlement. So the issues over here on the west side are more bread and butter issues related to housing, immigration. There's a lot of new people coming into this area here, and just general issues around like health, Medicare, personal safety, that kind of thing.
Cuthand is a journalist and commentator in Saskatoon. He himself is Indigenous and raised his own family in this riding.
Because you've got this silly myth that our people don't work, and we lived in the Saskatoon West, and we grew up with that. Our kids, their kids thought that we were on welfare because we were Indians.
Cuthand says while there is still more work to be done, a lot of positive changes have taken place within this riding.
There's more Indigenous-owned businesses in town here. We have tree land entitlement, which allowed a number of our reserves to buy more land. And a lot of them bought land surrounding the city, and that's going to be used for industry as well as housing and stuff like that. We've also got the urban reserve here, which is the Muskeg Lake Reserve at the edge of town, and there's a number of office buildings in there, including a brand new clinic. It's a very nice clinic. So there's a lot of jobs created in there, and a lot of money is flowing into the city of Saskatoon. And just down the street here, we have that one building over there, the big brown building. That's First Nations Bank of Canada. That is a piece of Indian land that's owned by one of the reserves that has treaty land entitlement. So there's a number of gas stations around the city too. So it's there's a growing presence in the city, and it's a commercial presence, and they're making a contribution in terms of taxation, in terms of service agreements, and in terms of just, generally raising our profile all over the place.
While all those changes for the better are taking place, there are a growing number of people in the riding for whom life is hard every day. Hilary Goff is the city councillor for Ward 2, which sits in the federal riding of Saskatoon West. She says it's simple math. There are more Indigenous people in this riding than anywhere else in the city. Therefore,
the reality is the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness are Indigenous.
And Goff says for years now, but particularly since the pandemic, social agencies and nonprofits are carrying an increasingly heavy load.
The operating dollars that they are having to put in to just close a financial gap for their clients is growing, and it's unsustainable. I'm excited to see, every party discussing affordable housing. I'm excited to see, parties talking about strengthening really core public services, things like, childcare and things like pharmacare, and talking about what it actually takes to have all governments at the table to, make our communities safe and healthy. And so, I think that I'm hoping that people will be engaged because they see their needs and themselves represented in the process.
The divide and the poverty is evident.
Well, who are you?
I'm Robert Doucette. I'm running for the NDP.
What's NDP mean?
Native Democratic Party. New Democratic Party.
And what would you be NDP? I don't get it.
Like what would we do?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we believe in is a guaranteed annual income for people so that they can live in a better way. Pharmacare is another thing that we believe in, that we want to make sure that people actually have access to medicine regardless of their income level or their age.
That's another good one.
Yeah, so housing, we're trying to...
housing, yes, that's a big one, eh?
That's a huge one.
It's just people are too judgmental, and there's just not enough. That's it. You have to have ideal to your yin-yang, which most street people don't, right? And also there's lots of barriers like not enough money,
Yeah, affordability.
Yeah, and it's just, you try and get a house and then you need to pay so much money to get this house. You get the money for the house, then you got to do a bunch of other stuff. It's just like you need social workers basically helping people transition into like normal life, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because they lived such a chaotic life, drugs and all chaotic, everything, that they need help to get to know what normal is. You know what I mean?
Doucette, who is Métis, says he encounters stories like this every day.
It's nice meeting you.
You too, sister.
I hope you win. I'll vote for you.
Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are saying that they want to implement UNDRIP in its entirety, and they also want to implement all of the TRC calls to action, which I think is huge, and it shows that respect and a willingness to deal with our issues. And that's another thing that attracted me to the NDP. And I know I'll make a joke out of it. There's so many Indigenous candidates running for the NDP now. We can call it the Native Democratic Party. It's good to be part of this party because I'm the kind of person that will sit down and listen to people, but I don't want to just hear people talk, and I want action.
So we were talking about the fact that you were raised, at least for part of your childhood, in a non-Indigenous home. Did you have to, was there a disconnect there? Did you have to reconnect with your Indigenous history a little bit?
Yeah, I was 20 years old when I met my mother again. And
how old were you when
you
were taken?
I was 2 months old when they came to Buffalo Narrows, and they took me away from my mother. And when I met my mother, she said they had been looking for me for 20 years.
But will simply being Indigenous be enough to command the Indigenous vote in this riding?
Mr. Doucette is really well known in the city of Saskatoon. That will carry weight. I'm not sure how many votes it will carry. I think we've got a situation where Indigenous people really came out in numbers in 2015. The numbers were much smaller in 2019. And I expect them to be smaller again. I don't, this is not, it's not as though, again, all parties have been talking very openly and enthusiastically, even warmly, about how they want to do their politics with Indigenous people very differently. So that's not a burning issue either. And I think people have very legitimate reasons to sort of wonder why or whether or not the Canadian political process works for Métis and First Nations people. But remember that they also have another level of government to work with that non-Indigenous people don't have. So the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan just had an election earlier this year, and they got a fairly substantial turnout. They had some really great candidates. They had some really great issues on the table. There were big debates among all the different presidential and vice presidential candidates. It was really great to see. Most non-Métis people didn't pay much attention to it. So it's not as though Indigenous people are underrepresented. I always find this fascinating because people will sort of say, well, Indigenous people aren't voting, they're not participating. Indigenous politics are some of the most engaged, representative, intense, passionate politics anywhere in the country. The Métis and the First Nations are very well represented in this country. And so for them, it's like, well, and now we're going to worry about a local constituency person? Yeah. Even if you like Mr. Doucette. So if you know him and you have a background and you savor his policies, of course you not only should vote, but you probably will vote. But if he doesn't mean that much to you, if you don't see that affecting your life, you got lots of other avenues for exercising your right to vote.
Indigenous affairs are a big part of the riding, but certainly not the only part of the tapestry.
You voted already? Oh, good. It's a picture of Canada, really. I mean, as you mentioned, a high Indigenous population and a lot of newcomers. And so that's been part of my strategy, is to reach out to all these different groups, get to know them, understand their needs and the things that are important to them. And that's been a lot of fun.
I'm yet to see an ethnocultural group that is not here. You have almost somebody from a different part of the world, like a different country, living in Saskatchewan. It could be 1, 2 people. You have pockets of people, and you have large groups of people. You see a lot of the diversity in our school systems. If you went to the public school or Catholic school board schools, lots of children who don't look the same, they're different, and that's where you see a lot of the diversity. Then it's changed a lot. A lot more people are coming here, whether through the federal immigration program or the provincial one. They're choosing to come here, and we have a lot more settlement agencies too, trying to serve newcomers. People are really choosing to come here because when you look at the environment, the busyness is at a slower pace when you compare to Toronto, and even the cost of living is even cheaper. So you can have a single mother like myself being able to purchase a home in Saskatoon. I couldn't do that in Toronto. So those kinds of considerations play on our minds. And when you come with limited funds, no matter how much you come with, it doesn't last forever. So you have to be honest with yourself about how much you can really afford and where your kids can really connect with other children and feel kind of comfortable.
Have you voted? Are you a citizen? No. You're PR still? Yeah. Next election you can vote. Yeah.
The Member of Parliament for this riding needs to be well versed in the complex immigration system.
The number one thing we deal with in our office is immigration cases, absolutely. And so my staff have become very expert at dealing with that and dealing with a lot of heartbreak. You know, you meet mothers or wives whose husbands and children are back home or vice versa, and it's not that they're just back home for a month or two, it's back home for years, you know, and there's a lot of almost counseling that goes on in our office, but it's so rewarding though to meet up with one of these people a year later or 18 months later and find out that their husband did come, that their wife did come, and the joy they have on their face. It really, you know, it reminds us why we do what we do. And it's through relationships that you can start to have conversations and you can start to move forward. It doesn't mean you agree all the time, because you don't, but when you have that relationship, you can have the hard discussions, the hard talks, and still move forward as friends. And that's the joy of doing this. We need to get our economy going. That is the key. We have to get jobs created. We have to get people working. We have to get people off their couches and back to work. The number one thing I hear from business owners, and by the way, newcomers are a very large proportion of the business owners. Many of them are entrepreneurs. They have their own small business. They can't find workers. And a part of that reason is that people are being incentivized to stay home. And so we have to stop that. We have to instead incentivize businesses to create jobs, to get people back to work, because that has a double effect. It gives people income for themselves, but it also keeps our economy and our tax revenues going.
Now, besides immigration and Indigenous issues, there's another big issue here, getting bigger by the day, in fact. Saskatchewan has now overtaken its western neighbor, Alberta, to claim the highest per capita case rate of COVID-19. And here in Saskatoon, the active case rate is about 5 times higher than the other major city here in Saskatchewan, Regina, which has roughly the same population.
And so I hear it all. You know, we're doing too much, we're not doing enough. Should have acted sooner, shouldn't have acted. I mean, I hear it all. And so what we need to do is support the provinces. You know, Scott Moe's in a difficult position. He needs to make the best decisions that he can for the province. And we as a federal government need to be there supporting with healthcare money. That's why we want to increase the amount of healthcare transfers that we're sending to the provinces, so that premiers like Scott Moe don't have to make the difficult decisions on healthcare.
I really haven't decided, and it's a hard decision because they've all got policies that I don't agree with, so I'm having a real hard time putting it all together.
I'm PC.
Why?
Had enough of the Liberal government.
You know, federally, as much as I'm not a fan of PPC, I think they're going to bleed 5-8% away from the Conservatives. I think Aaron O'Toole hasn't done anything to gain any traction. So I actually, if you ask me who I think is going to win and what's going to happen, I actually think the Liberals will eke out a tiny majority. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that's what I think will happen.
Although the race is considered to be between Doucette, the NDP candidate, and Redekop, the Conservative incumbent, there are 5 candidates in the riding, including a Liberal.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Raja Kumar. I am the Liberal Party candidate for your riding. I've been a doctor for the last 40 years in this province. I'm still practicing medicine. I'm a cardiologist. Could I count on your support, sir?
Dr. Raj Kumar has worked in this area for 40 years. His platform is focused on health, management of chronic conditions, and preventative medicine. Raj Kumar says many patients with chronic conditions were afraid to go to a hospital or health checkups due to COVID-19. That neglect has cost some their lives.
This is a big problem. For whichever the government comes into power, it's very difficult to solve. Till we control and manage this pandemic.
Year and a half, have you had patients that you know should have had procedures or have neglected to come in for appointments because of this pandemic?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And then what's the result of that? I mean, you don't have to give me their personal information.
Bad outcomes. Bad outcomes.
Yeah.
Or very obvious. So we have a health system which is strained because all this time we have been focusing on late stage management, late stage disease. What we should focus on, early disease and preventive medicine in a publicly funded, publicly managed healthcare system. The data is the Canadian health system spent significant amount of money about 2 weeks before people die. That is waste of public money.
Despite COVID being a big issue here, and despite the fact Raj Kumar is a doctor, he is trailing in the polls, a distant third place to the Conservatives and NDP, who've been flip-flopping back and forth. As a health professional, the doctor says he believes the Liberals have done a good job managing the pandemic and keeping people afloat financially with income supports. That's why he's choosing to run for the Liberal Party of Canada. His opponents say Trudeau made a mistake calling this election when he did.
There was no reason for Trudeau to call this election other than power grab. So that's why we're here, and I hear that over and over again at the doors. People are unhappy that we're in an election, especially with a pandemic happening all around us in Canada.
So while Raj Kumar is not expected to move up much higher in the next few days, could he take votes from the other progressive candidate currently leading in the polls?
I would hope that electors in this constituency would see from the platforms and also from the experience of the candidates. Based on that, they would come to the conclusion that I'm the candidate for this riding. I mean, every party is worried about it. I mean, I'm sure the Conservatives are worried about PPC now. And we see that. We see the PPC pulling support away from the Conservative candidate.
Ken Coates is a political scientist, a professor at the University of Saskatchewan. He says the Liberal candidate won't gain enough support to come close to catching up to Doucette or Redicop, making this a two-man race.
What is Saskatoon West? The area around Idlewild was always, not very wealthy. The alphabet streets were sort of seen as not such a good place to go. But Saskatoon West now has the biggest high-rises on the whole province. Saskatoon West now has a whole bunch of gentrification going on along exactly those corridors that were not so attractive before. And people are moving back in with fitness studios, they're moving back in with new restaurants, people are rebuilding houses for the first time in a long time. I think this is going to be a really close riding. Saskatoon West has been growing very dramatically, heading west. The city of Saskatoon has been growing very fast. And there's a whole bunch of people who are bought new homes, built new homes, whole high-rises, townhouses out in the western part of the city. And whenever you have that kind of rapid development, you don't even know who they are. You have no idea how they're going to vote because they weren't there 4 years ago.
Some aren't deciding based on political stripes, but are making their decisions based on what hits close to home.
Top of my mind is how we're going to dig ourselves out of this debt that they've got us into, and how they're going to deal with the COVID that still doesn't seem to be going away. That's my two primary concerns.
Economy, jobs, no more lockdowns.
It should be mandatory for people to get vaccinated, instead of giving people a choice so that we all can move on with our lives, instead of having people choose whether they can be vaccinated or not, and especially at workplace too, like you go to work and you want to make sure that all your coworkers are vaccinated, and even if you travel, you just don't want to take the risk. So that's right now, that's my biggest concern about this COVID.
The issues, I think, are all very human issues. We want to make sure that the world's taken care of, not just in our lifetime, or that we have lower taxes or some BS like that. We're very interested in knowing that the world's going to be in a bit of a healthier place when we leave it. I think most people say that at their core. Most of the politicking ends up being very short term. So yeah, obviously, environment, economy, they go together, so don't make them a one issue thing. After that, I think both of us care a lot about how we treat each other. And so anybody who has policies that are selfish and self-centered and aggressively uniform for one person or one group, it's not interesting to us.
There's three areas: Indigenous issues, climate change, and long-term care.
Well, there's an obvious no choice. Is the Liberal Party is not in the running, so it's between the rest of them. And Bernier, he's out, so between the rest of them, Green Party doesn't have a chance, so it's narrowing down.
I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm trying to. I listened to the debate the other day, and I still haven't made up my mind. But I really don't know which way I'm going to go yet.
Is there a different mindset about how you cast your ballot if you've come from another country and made Canada your new second home?
Yes and no. By that I mean religion can play a factor in how people vote, because people still carry their religious beliefs across the Atlantic Ocean and come here. So when they think a party is more aligned with their religious beliefs, they might start leaning towards that party. It could also be the factor of their business ownership. I've had a series of conversations with my own friends about taxes and what it means for their own bottom line as business owners. And then if you're very socially conscious, right, you put aside maybe the tax considerations for those other conversations about social justice issues, and that could also weigh on your mind.
We should be having these conversations about where Saskatchewan fits in Canada and why Canada is relevant to this province. And I've been listening. Those are not the conversations. They're vote for me, don't vote for them. Saskatchewan needs to know it's part of a country that cares. And that, in fact, it has a role to play in the future. We produce an enormous amount of food for this country. Potash, exports are huge coming out of the province of Saskatchewan. The uranium potential is staggering. We're powering the world, but just not Saskatchewan and not much of Canada.
I won't let you down.
I know you will.
And with just days to go before the votes are counted, everyone will be in their final push this week to secure every last available vote.
We are just slightly behind in the polls, and it's only through our very hard efforts that we will get ahead and win on Election Day. And that's the message I've given my team. We always need to do more. We always need to help those in need, regardless of where they are coming from. And I think with our Indigenous population, you know, I've reached out to many of them. We've talked about some of their needs, and I think a lot of the community is helping out in different ways.
People voting because they want to see an Indigenous candidate be their MP, and they want to see a person that works hard and is a family person and deals with the community's issues. That's what they want to see. A lot of them, yeah. You see, it's not so much the party anymore as much as it's the person now.
For CPAC, I'm Alyssa Carpenter in Saskatoon.